All right, so to do this, for example number 1, first of all, I should probably point out a couple of things. One is there's 2 forms, right, of the linear equation. So we're talking about linear equations today. Remember, there's y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. And so if you guys recall, and maybe you don't recall, but we'll review this real quick. If I have a graph on the xy plane, perfectly drawn line, this is the x-axis, right? This is the y-axis. B is where it crosses the y-intercept, or the y-axis. That's why we call it the y-intercept. Now, if you have a line that goes through, this is our equation, y equals, oh boy, really got to calibrate that. Y equals mx plus b. The m is going to be the rise over run. So if we go from this point here and we go, down and over, right? So m is the slope, which is the rise over run. It could be positive or negative. In this case, it's negative because it's going downhill. But what it does is we go down a certain amount and then we go over. And then if we go down the same amount and we go over, it puts us right back on the line. In fact, the line represents all the possible corresponding y points based on the value of x. What that means is when I plug in a value for x, if I say x equals 1 and I plug it into the formula, that gives me a y value. But I can also say x equals 1.1. I can also say x equals 1.2. I could say x equals 1 point whatever. And so if you take all those points and put them together, the line, the linear graph, is this red line. Okay. Now we can also represent a linear function or linear equation with what we call the point slope form. And so what we're going to do is we say x sub 1, y sub 1, that's a point on the line. So if I were to come in here and I said there's a point on the line, now it doesn't matter which point it is. I can think of that x value as x sub 1 and y sub 1. Y sub 1 and x sub 1. Subset notation is saying this is one xy value, just one. You could have x sub 2, y sub 2. You could have x sub 3, y sub 3. That's just saying this is the first set of x and y. This is the second set of x and y. And so what the question is, just kind of a review. That's what we're doing. So the question then is, write an equation in slope-intercept form that has a slope of -2. Well, we know slope equals m, and they told us the slope was -2. That passes through the point. This is our point, x sub 1, comma, y sub 1. In other words, x sub 1 equals 3, and y sub 1 equals 7. So in order to write this in slope-intercept form, we really got to start with the point-slope form, and then we got to solve for the y-intercept form. So those are the steps, step 1 and 2. So let me show you what that looks like. So we'll start with y minus y sub 1 is equal to the slope m times the quantity x minus x sub 1. Okay? And so what I'm going to do is I know what the slope is, I know what x sub 1 is, I know what y sub 1 is, and I'm just going to plug them all in. So y and x, these two variables remain the same because that's where we get our equation from. All right? So these are going to be the same. And then we're going to plug everything else in. So what's y sub 1? It's 7, right? It's 7, so I'm going to plug the 7 in here. What's the slope? -2, so I'm going to plug the -2 in. In other words, wherever I see y sub 1, I'm going to put 7. Okay. Remember, this minus sign is part of the formula. Sometimes you'll have a y sub 1 that's negative, so you got to take the negative of a negative. All right. So then my slope is -2, and then x is a +3. This minus sign is part of the formula, so I write it in here. Now that's what the line is in point slope form, but we need it in slope-intercept form. So what I need to do is I'm going to distribute it. In other words, I'm going to take this line and make it look like y equals some stuff. Okay, I'm going to solve for y, but I got to do a little work first. So I got to distribute this -2 through. So over here, this stays the same, y minus 7. And then what's -2 times x? What's that? Mr. Adams, you're recording. We don't want to talk. That's fine. -2x. What's -2 times -3? +6. So you'll say, Mr. Adams, you say that weird. Yeah, I do it on purpose. Okay. Do we have y by itself yet? No. What do we need to move? -7. Always think in terms of moving things of the sign in front of the number or variable. So that 7 is being subtracted from y, so I would need to do the inverse, which is to add 7. Now 7 is a constant, so I can only add the numbers with the numbers, right? Like terms and whatnot. So then what I'm going to do is the 7's cancel, right? What's 7 minus 7? 0. What's 0 plus y? Y. The -2x comes down, and what's 6 plus 7? +13. Well, bam with the bacon sizzle. That is the graph. Now, we know that the slope was -2. They told us that. But what's the y-intercept? +13. The y-intercept is +13.